You're not muted. I'm not muted. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are glad to have you for this week's History's Lunch. I love seeing a full room today. I'm Drew Gardner with the two Mississippi Museums, and we're glad to be in our home, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. We'll also thank everybody that's joining us, both on Facebook and YouTube. For those of you that are new with us today, each of these programs every Wednesday at noon are both recorded and live streamed on both our Facebook and YouTube page for MDH. So we'd love for you to go check some of the previous programs out, or if you miss one in the future, you can go back and find that program for you at any time. But today we are delighted to have an incredible panel with us today, Bebe Wolfe, Daniel Johnson, and Michael Pickard, in their presentation of A Living, Breathing Legacy, Continuing the Wolfe Studio. Elizabeth Bebe Wolfe, as many of you know, is a painter and arts leader who grew up in a family of artists. She's the daughter of Carl and Mildred Wolfe. After earning her BFA in painting from the Portland School of Art, she returned back to Jackson in 1985 with her husband David to support and expand the Wolfe Studio into a thriving cottage industry art collective employing local artists. Daniel Johnson is a multidisciplinary artist and performer whose work is shaped by his experience as a parent, organizer, museum educator, and public historian. Daniel is also the board chair of the Wolfe Creative Legacy and has been instrumental in reimagining the Wolfe Studio as a space centered on creatively healing and community engagement. And then Michael Pickard, who is also with us today, is the Eudora Welty Chair of Southern Literature and Associate Professor of English and Creative Writing at Millsaps. Michael also serves as the chair of the Archive Advisory Committee at the Wolfe Studio. And so let's please give this incredible panel a warm round of applause.
Am I on? Yes.
Are.
Good afternoon, everyone. I believe it's afternoon. I see lots of familiar people out here. I'm just going to talk kind of somewhat briefly about my parents, Carl and Mildred Wolfe. Some of you are familiar with them and their history. Some of you may not be. But they were both artists and really accomplished artists. Daniel is going to run this show for you, and I'm not going to pay a whole lot of attention to it because it's behind my back. So, oh, there it is, right there. Good. So as I talk, you'll be seeing some images. My father was born in 1904. My mother was born in 1912. So they married late in life. So I feel like my heritage sort of stretches back a little bit further into history than if they had been young parents. They were old parents. My father was 40 when I was born, so it's a wonder I got here. They were both artists when they met. But the story of how they became artists in that era is interesting. My father was born in Columbia, Mississippi, and was artistically inclined when he was young and dreamed about being an artist, but he had no idea how to do it. And there was no such thing as mass media these days to research such a thing. So his father told him, well, I don't know anything about being an artist, but I think you ought to figure out how to make a living. So he sent him to become a bookkeeper at a school in New Orleans, the Soule Business School. I don't know if it's still there or not, but there he met another young man who was in the same fix. His father, he wanted to be an artist, and his father had said, no, go learn how to do something you can make a living at first. So they became fast friends, and this other young man had already been accepted to the Chicago Art Institute. And so he encouraged my father to apply there. So my father had to work for a whole year as a bookkeeper in order to raise the money to leave and become, try to get out of Columbia and go to Chicago. And he applied and was accepted. And the year that he went there, his friend that he had met in New Orleans was there to meet him on the train. So he had some lucky things happen. And this was in the 20s when he was in art school in Chicago. He was exposed to all kinds of things, all the great museums in Chicago with all their wonderful artworks from all over the world. Got a wonderful education there. And at the end of his time, he won a scholarship, it's a traveling scholarship, and he got to go to Europe with that money. Spent over a year in Europe traveling. So he became, really quite educated in art. When he was in Europe, that was his goal, was to see as much as he could. When he came back to the States, when he was on the boat traveling back to the States, the stock market fell in the 30s. And I guess it was 1930. I think he was about 27 years old, 26 or 27. He arrived in this country with no money at all, enough money to get to Meridian on the train, and enough money to call his sister to come get him from Columbia with a payphone call, and that was it. And then nobody else had any money. It's the depth of the Depression. Money had just evaporated. So luckily he had saved all of his art supplies, and he had been a janitor when he was in school, so he collected everybody's leftovers and stashed it away at his mother's house. And there was a little building in the backyard that he was able to use for a studio, and he started painting because there was no other thing for him to do. And his mother was a member of the garden club, and she said, well, I think if you would paint still lifes with flowers, my garden club members would buy them. So he started doing it, and he thought he had painted hundreds of still lifes and sold them for $5 a piece to anybody who had $5. But it was enough to get him through the Depression. And then there was the Municipal Gallery in Jackson. This was a day when there were no galleries. It's not like Mississippi had fine art galleries where you could walk in and look at art. But there was the Municipal Gallery in Jackson on State Street. That was where he was invited to have a show. And there was a woman who ran the gallery at that time. She was really championed him and really, tried to encourage people to pay attention to his work. And he was successful in having a couple of shows there. And then he decided to move to Jackson and stayed with his cousin on Congress Street, a house that's not there anymore. It was kind of near Davis School. And that got him, and right, I think a couple of houses down is where Hollingsworth lived. And they became close friends and went painting in the country together. And so that was his life up until about 1938 or so, 37, 38, he was asked to go be a resident artist at this art colony in Alabama. And this is where he met my mother. My mother was from Decatur, Alabama. She had also had this determination to be an artist. I mean, where does this come from out of the blue? You know, and what do you do with it? Anyway, she was one of the most determined people I have ever known in my life. This single-minded desire to create art. Of course, in Decatur, Alabama, it was the same situation. Nobody knew anything about artists or how to be one or what artists did or anything. Her father found this correspondence course that was being offered by Columbia University. And this was an era when correspondence courses were quite popular in all kinds of subjects. So this one had been created by someone named Aaron Cross, who taught at Columbia, and it was a systematic way of teaching drawing, composition, all kinds of different media, starting with the simplest subjects, going up into more complex subjects. And the way it worked was that she would get a letter in the mail that would describe the assignment. She would do the assignment, she would send it back. Then a few weeks later, she would receive a letter, another letter, all typewritten from the instructor himself, Aaron Cross, and she would receive her drawing back. It was all marked up, all the things she did wrong. Now that itself shows the tenacity of her, of her involvement with this, that she was not discouraged by criticism. She took the criticism and applied it, and the assignments got more and more complicated. She was 14, I think, about 14 when she started this course. And it went on for several years, so she was able to, mature while she was doing it. So with the encouragement of that course, and then when she got into college, she had one art teacher who actually was an artist and who really, really encouraged her. And then the Depression happened, and she had to go teach school. And back then there was no teacher training. She was as green as you could be teaching school, and she had to go to Coleman, Alabama, which is more of a Appalachian sort of town. Decatur's on the river valley, Coleman's up in the hills, and culture a little bit different. And she was homesick as she could be, but luckily, and she's also said that the high school, she taught English and Latin in high school, and she said some of the boys in the high school class she taught were just a few years older than she was. Because some of them had been held back, and then she had been pushed forward by her father at a younger age to go to school. But luckily, she was really charming, and they were all had a crush on her, so she so she got along with them. And a year later, she was able to come back to Decatur, where she taught for 10 years. And she had a studio built in the backyard where she would paint. And she wrote in her memoir that she thought life was just going to pass her completely by, that she was just going to have to be a school teacher forever and not ever really, have a chance to make it as an artist. And then she discovered this art colony in Alabama. It's called the Dixie Art Colony. It went on for 1 month every summer. And it was taught by a real artist, Kelly Fitzpatrick, who was of an older generation before her. But he was a real live wire and really, got a lot of people going with painting. So that was a real immersion in painting. And so that's where my parents met. And my mother wrote that all the people at the at school had at the art colony had decided they would be the perfect couple and conspired to leave them together on their first meeting. And she did not like to be manipulated. She decided, she made up her mind she was going to not go for that at all. But by the end of that month, I think she had fallen in love with him, and the story gets complicated from there. It was on the brink of our involvement in World War II, and just when he was realizing that she was in love with him, he was drafted. So he was sent to the Army Air Corps in Colorado, which is now the Air Force base, but then it was the Army Air Corps, and put in a unit that where people did graphic design and photography and things like that. She kind of followed him there. She conspired to get herself a scholarship to go to Colorado College for a master's degree, and figured that they would meet up somehow, which they did. So to shorten the story a bit, they were married there. My father wanted to come back to Jackson because he already had a following in Jackson and thought he could make a living here. Plus, he had bought the property where our studio is now. And then it was a piece of just wild land, way outside the city limits. So my brother was born in 1946, and they had to move out of where they were, and they decided they would homestead on this land, which was, Old Kent Road was a dirt road. There was no interstate there. Meadowbrook Road was a dirt road. Back then there was a trolley, believe it or not, that would start downtown and it would sort of end in Fondren. And so they lived up near Millsaps College, and they would take the trolley out to the end of its line, then they would walk all the way out to the property and do things out there and clear brush. And my father built a tool shed, which is one of the buildings that's in a picture over here. It's still there, that building. So my father built the studio, the old studio there first, which is in some of these photographs. And then they built their house, and this is where I grew up. I was born in 1949, so I grew up on the spot, and remember, in my early childhood, I remember the wildness of it. I remember, screech owls at night, and Chuck Will's widows, and lots of butterflies and birds, and a lot of insect sound and cicadas that would just almost deafen you at night. and the expanse of the land with no highway, nothing but we were outside the city limits in my childhood growing up there. So to jump the story ahead, I went to art school in Maine in the 1980s, and my father died in 1985, and I came back here. I talked my husband into it, met my husband in Maine, and I miraculously talked him into moving to Mississippi. But I wanted to be with my mother, and because she was, because I loved her, and because she was not a real gregarious person. She was always very, very focused on her work, and she didn't have a big social network. And I was just worried about her being so alone, and I knew that I needed to be there. So we were lucky enough, my husband and I, to buy the adjoining property that was farther up the hill. So it made our life much better. And also I could take care of my mother during her old age. She needed more and more help. So I was right there able to do all that. And while doing all that, she had been determined to keep the ceramic business going. And if you wonder how ceramics got mixed up in, started by two painters, it was a way that they could make something inexpensive and get customers to come into the studio. They were out there in the middle of the country, scratching their heads about how are we going to make a living, So there was, and like I said, there were no galleries to represent people. And they thought, well, if we have something less expensive, we have a way people will come and buy that. And then they might buy a painting or they might commission a portrait. So the ceramics was their bread and butter item. And they enjoyed making them. It was something they did together. So it was more of a, collaborative kind of a thing. When I came back in the 1980s, my mother was determined to keep doing it. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was determined to keep on with the ceramics. So I kind of got commandeered to keep it going and to help the effort. And my husband and I took over the business from my mother in 2002, I believe. And I quickly learned I needed to hire people to help me to keep it going. And it's become a really, I hope, a really creative business where I have people that it's not a top-down sort of thing. I don't design everything from the top and then require everybody to do it exactly that way. It is more collaborative with my crew of people. And even after all these years, there's still some excitement about things that come out of that we make, things that come out of the kiln that we didn't expect. I'm in the process of making a few new shapes and new molds. And we hope to keep all this going. I have met Daniel Johnson, who is helping me with the Wolfe Creative Legacy, which we've created about 3 years ago, nonprofit. It's aimed at trying to keep the land intact and the studio intact, and to have this be a cultural asset to the city. I also have a meditation hall that David, my husband, and I built in 2002. And it is now used by 3 different groups that come and use it as a place to meditate, a place to do spiritual practice. And that is really dear to my heart. It's not something I will lead with when I talk about myself in one of these talks, but the whole enterprise of the place supports the meditation dojo, as well as my husband and I's living. It supports a crew of artists by paying salaries, and it supports all the animals and the life that lives there. So really, we're trying in our effort for the nonprofit, and this living, breathing thing is what we're trying to preserve. And of course, it will change, because everything does, but that's a good thing. Things that evolve are living. And so that's what we're aiming at. So I'm going to stop my talk now, which I think is just in time, and let Daniel speak.
I'm impressed. We spent time talking about your timing, and this clock up here, you really wrote it. It was perfect. Hello. I really enjoy the tension between what we plan to do when we get somewhere and then what's actually happened when we arrive. And, preparing to be on a stage, preparing to talk, I always think through it. I prepare something, but then you get there and you see the people, you see who's gathered, you hear what came before. And so I'm going to ride this wave between what I prepared and what feels right in this moment, and seeing how well it fits with the slideshow that you send in the Friday before. But listening to Bebe really gets my mind rooted in, that scrappy, making something out of nothing, do-it-yourself story that I think is very quintessentially Southern. Speaks to what it means to be in the Southern United States, and to really make something happen here, and especially something creative. We're a state that's really known for the cultural offerings that issue forth from this land. Even as all of those stories are often about how hard it was to do that. And so I think there's this real tempering that happens that then creates a particular character and the types of creative products that come out of Mississippi and the U.S. South, because you're kind of being forced through the fire to bring it forth. There's not a lot of old money philanthropy wash. I remember going to the Northeast as a young artist and saying, "Oh my gosh, look at all these resources." And so I love to hear the story of your parents, and your own, story to come back here and say, okay, well, how am I now going to make it here, and to not make it by kind of trailing after where you might find resources, but to really continue to be rooted in a piece of land, inspired by what's unfolding there, and kind of insisting to say, you know what, I want to be here. I love it here. What does it mean to stay here? How do I continue to be an artist to create here? I'm curious who here has been to the Wolfe Studio, that property at 4308 Old Canton Road. Raise your hand. Lots and lots of hands. I love that. For those who haven't, it is on the frontage road of I-55, just north of the Meadowbrook Road exit, just south of Highland Village and Nukes, right there. And for those of you who haven't gone, you've probably driven by and seen the driveway going up into the woods and the little sign that says Wolfe Studio, and you thought to yourself, can I go up in there? Yes. The answer is yes. Come stop by. And in fact, if you stop by Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. or Saturday, 10 to 2, you can walk inside the gallery and see us. Carl wrote a memoir. It came out in 1979, and it's very difficult to get, but you could go to the library and check out a copy. But in his memoir, Carl described that land upon seeing it in 1939, saying that he had fallen in love with a wild piece of land outside the city. Big and little trees grew on it. So did Johnson grass, 2 feet taller than my head, and Cherokee roses, blue-eyed grass, poison ivy, and sedge, pink sedge. He shared that in another quote, "Something inevitable exists here, as if things could not be otherwise. Bushes, trees, paths, steps in the right places. Whole areas seeming untouched. Serenity is what every visitor mentions, and that may be what we unconsciously strived toward, for everything was done by instinct, except the drainage." It's hard for me to imagine that little piece of property without the Wolfe Studio in the woods, alongside all these office buildings and retail. Probably as hard as it was for Carl and Mildred to imagine an interstate endlessly flowing across what was the front of their property before the interstate took it. My first full-time job as an artist was at Wolfe Studio out in the clay shed about 20 years ago, just as my oldest son was being born. And it really began for me a career in the arts, which carried me through museums and archives and board service and large-scale community projects. And, during the pandemic, when much of my work was about bringing strangers together to share materials and work, that went away. And I found myself back at the Wolfe Studio with Bebe, really contemplating my own future, but having been in the museum world and in the world of history and archives and with boards and nonprofits, like contemplating the future of that piece of land. This is a picture from the annex at the Wolfe Studio, which adjoins the clay shed. This is where new sculpted forms begin. And so on the summer solstice in 2021, I asked Bebe to meet me there. And I said, there's always this conversation of what's going to happen to the Wolfe Studio. And I don't know that there's an answer to that. And the answer was, well, it'll sunset along with Bebe and David, which I think is a natural thing as a human being, as you're aging, to say, I worked so hard all my life. This thing will end with me. And I asked her, I said, you know the kind of work I do. I bring communities together to imagine the future, and had done that in the medical sector and in agriculture and in education, always as an artist, thinking about the way story brings us together. And I said, I don't know what we can do, but would you trust me to see what can happen? Because people have written the Wolfe Studio into their own stories, whether they were a student of Carl and Mildred at Millsaps, or they were artists that learned under them at Allison Wells Art Colony, or an artist who showed in their gallery. All the many people who've bought figurines for a baby's christening or a marriage. And this little form sits on your shelf and holds that memory. She shared with me that, as her mother was approaching the end of her life, she really impressed upon Bebe that she did not want her home to be a museum. She was not interested in putting Wolfe Studio and putting that land under a vitrine and preserving it as it was. And she said, you know what, as soon as I'm gone, if that studio needs to come into this house and take over, you let that happen. Let it be what it needs to be. And so Bebe said, if we can create something that lives and breathes, then that's probably worth doing. And so it was really along those words that this journey began. And really thinking about the activity at Wolfe Studio, all that's happening on the land, all of the creative production, the 5 different community groups that utilize the meditation dojo and meditate there, the story and the stories that are told over and over again that use that location as an anchor point in the story. And the ways that those things create these community connections between us, these important references that we share, that drive our thinking, that drive our imagination. And so, myself as an artist who organizes with community, I always try to begin with the people who are impacted the most by the decisions that will be made. And so that was Bebe and David. And I said, well, what's important to you? And she said, well, honoring my parents' legacy is really on my mind. And all of these papers that I have, all of these artworks that I have, all of the objects of my parents, they're just in this room, and I need to organize them. I need to think about what happens with them. And so while there are many things to talk about in regards to the Wolfe creative legacy and the ways that we're building community around these different aspects of what's happening there, because of our setting and History is Lunch, I'm going to spend most of my focus on the archive. And so, this is the corner of Bebe's childhood bedroom. You'll see some things there in the background and on the desk that have been organized. We wanted to bring people intentionally into community around this, but it began with me and Bebe just kind of going through, her artwork. Her papers, trying to decide what to start with, trying to think of how do you organize these things. And we really wanted to be a community-based archive, which, on one hand, you may have an institutional archive where there are historians, there are archivists who are kind of making decisions based on, the principles of the field, thinking about what to do with a set of papers. But in a community-based archive, you really try to be co-governed in the way that you approach it, by the people who are in that story and of that story. And so that's a particular wrinkle in our approach that I always want to communicate and get across. And that's something that pervades all the activity we do, is really trying to bring the people who are impacted by this story, who find themselves in the story of the Wolfe family, into conversation and into co-governance and co-development, collaboration. Which the more you know about the Wolfe Studio, what happens with the artists there, very much part of that long legacy is that idea of co-creation. So part of that is that we have lots of committees. We've got a land committee, we've got a collaboration committee, a collections committee, really trying to meet people where their interest is, where they're plugged in, to come in and talk about, how can we make this accessible? The collaboration committee really thinking about how do we bring people into co-creation with the materials to have an archive that's publicly accessible, where we invite people to activate those materials and continue to be creative with creative products. People on the land committee thinking about, where do you see history still apparent in nature? These little sawed-off telephone poles where it used to be an embankment for a bridge that used to be over the drainage. But on the other side, the Archive Advisory Committee thinking about people who may only intercept the collection online. How do we help them see the site? Because it's so important that we're trying to house these elements where they were created. And so, and I'll speak a little bit more about that Archive Advisory Committee in a moment. This is, that was me and Bebe on the first day. This is me and Angela Stewart, the archivist at Margaret Walker Center. I was in the history graduate program there in 2021 at JSU. And so I was able to parlay a Mellon history fellowship into really working intensely with Angela to help me and Bebe figure out how are we going to make the organization of the archive itself begin to tell a story and not just be a chronology. So that we're bringing people into something that has a little more of a narrative quality, something people can touch with their soul a little bit. And so we began with Carl's correspondence, and really utilized that back and forth with Angela to kind of begin to build that model. And through that year, she really helped us to solidify how that was going to work, so that we could then begin to expand that into all these other pieces that were there in all those totes. And this is a day we went down to the Piney Woods together there's a portrait that Carl painted of Dr. Lawrence Jones, the founder of Piney Woods, that still hangs there in the office. We went to go and see. And then at the end of that year, I get this email from Dr. Pickard here, who was like, I heard from Dr. Luckett that y'all are working on a little archive project, and we are doing something around digital humanities and community-based archives, and maybe we could partner. And so I asked him to be here today. He's actually become the chair of our archive advisory committee and just kept getting deeper, as all good friends do. And so I was like, hey, well, get up on stage with me and let me let you share a little bit about the Welty Digital Lab and why you would want to work with someone like us. What does that mean?
So I told Daniel when he asked me to be on this panel that it was a dangerous thing to give an English professor a microphone, but I'm going to try to limit myself. I'm so excited to be here and honored to be a part of this conversation and the work that the Wolfe Creative Legacy is doing. It's been such a wonderful and beautiful opportunity to get to know Daniel, who was already a friend, even deeper, and to meet new friends and to get to know Bebe and to learn more about the Wolfe story. And this was not scripted, but Daniel used a phrase earlier that I'm also going to use here in just a second, and I think it will tell you something about how our minds work together in tandem, and we think a lot alike, I think, in many ways. At Millsaps, one of the things I do is I direct an endowed initiative called the Digital Welty Lab, and you see our website on the slide. Our mission in the Digital Welty Lab is to enlist undergraduate students in an effort to imagine Eudora Welty's digital future. And that work expands to wider, the wider future of Welty's circle as a Jackson author and artist who invested so much of her own imaginative energy here in our community. Two big ideas drive the work that we do that I'm sure you're familiar with, but one is that we're just living through, I think, a momentous shift in media, in the way that we consume media and the way that we produce media, texts of all kinds. We were already in the middle of this shift before the rise of AI, but as you know, AI has intensified that shift, made it deeper and wider and more far-reaching. A decade or so ago, when I first got to Millsaps, I like to say that we were living through a shift that we had really not seen since the 1450s, when Johann Gutenberg developed a technology for printing text using letterpress printing methods, and that the shift that we were living through was just as momentous as that. And I think that's even more true a decade in. So that's one of our big ideas. The other idea is that we have to give the future what it needs to understand us as its past. I'm a big believer in the idea that we are given a cultural inheritance, and that part of our job is to take care of that cultural inheritance and to pass it along as intact as we possibly can to future generations, because they won't be able to understand us unless we give them the material that they will need to tell accurate stories about our lives. Does that make sense? It's an important idea to me that I try to do in all of my work as a scholar. It's fundamental to that. And so the Welty Lab operates on these two big ideas. One of the things that we are so excited to do is to partner with organizations like the Wolfe Studio to be a part of giving the future what it needs to understand us as its past. And so when I learned about the work that Daniel and Bebe and Angela Stewart, who's also a dear friend, were doing here at the Wolfe Studio, it just seemed like a no-brainer to begin reaching out and developing a collaboration with them. And so we're entering the 4th year of our partnership. During that time, we've had, I think, 5 or 6 of our Welty fellows, or Millsaps undergraduates, work in the actual archive that you saw a picture of a few slides ago. To date, they have digitized more than 300 letters, transcribed more than 100, and we've begun developing a website that will allow anyone who wants to engage with these cultural materials. And the idea being there that the more freely we can make these materials accessible, the more freely available we can make them, the more we are creating opportunities to engage with what I think is a really important part of our cultural inheritance here in Jackson. And so I'm going to limit my remarks here, but just say that I would love to talk more in the question and answer. I also would be remiss if I did not note that we have 4 alums, Welty Fellow alums here in the room, all of whom are working for the Department of Archives and History. So Izzy Sewell, who actually worked here at the Wolfe Studio as part of this project, Skylar Smith, Soraya Lodge, and Brittany Wilson. And so it gives me great pride as a educator to be able to see my former students here in the room doing amazing work as part of this institution. So I'm so grateful to share this work with you. I'm eager to talk a little bit more about what the archival work that we do at the Wolfe Studio will look like going forward. I think I will stop there and pass things back over to you, Daniel.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring us home by just kind of talking a little bit about where we're at in this work. We've designed the organizing strategy. We've organized 800 plus documents. That 300 some odd letters is about 599 images that have been digitized, along with typed transcripts. Patricia Seiner, when she was an intern with us, created a digitization manual that is incredibly impressive. We organized the Archive Advisory Committee, which Michael chairs. We've recorded 12 hours of oral history, and that's video and audio, thanks to the Mississippi Humanities Council helping us to get that equipment, and that's with Bebe and her husband, David Weideman. And then this year we commissioned a research project from Dr. Elise Smith, who's a professor emeritus art history at Millsaps College. And she's focused on Mildred's landscapes of the property. And so, in the short time that we've been working and trying to kind of do this in the cracks, as we're also making sure the drainage of the land continues to be clear, and when a tree falls, cut it up, take it to the landfill, producing programs for this year, which is the 80th anniversary of the Wolfe Studio. It's been a careful step-by-step process, and it's nice to be in it at this point, to be able to have a list of things that I can point to and a list of amazing people who are committed to this work with me. I mentioned this is very much a work of community organizing. So, we spent time with the artists, with the people who meditated at the dojo, building community agreements, building a set of values together that we would work by. As one of the very first things, because you have to kind of agree on why you're somewhere together and how you want to work together before you can really work together. And then that led into bylaws. It led into the creation of the nonprofit, July 2024. And so now, 2 years later, here we are with a slate of programming, 9 events this year, 3 exhibitions that we're producing, continuing this work with the archive. We'll have 2 more Millsap students from the Welty Lab starting again here at the end of August, and just continuing in that work. But I think that is not unique to us. I look at this program and I showed up and realized that they opened this room an hour early, and that community begins to gather long before the program starts, to talk about what's going on, to share information, to then sit and learn together, and then to leave the room open for 30 minutes afterward to be in conversation. I think that we are rooted in a legacy of organizing in Mississippi and in Jackson especially, and one that I think, especially through Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, recognize that culture and being embedded, living alongside community is part of how you do that work appropriately, to honor the people whose story you're involved in. I was doing work in lots of different communities, kind of dropping in my artistic practice, and it was here in Jackson, but it was also not necessarily in my community. And so coming back to Wolfe Studio was a way of thinking about, well, where's my story? How do I get back into that? And begin to pull our attention to each other and ask, well, what are we doing together? What have we been doing together? What does that mean for what we can do together? And so it's a pleasure to be able to be here with you, and I appreciate your time listening to us, to kind of catch you up for those who have not heard of this yet. Even as I look around and see so many people that have come by the property and have have dipped into this work that we're doing together over the past 5 years. So this is the last slide, and I probably should have put our website on it, but I will direct you. We've got some our calendar for the year over here on the table, along with some objects from our archive, some flyers that have our website on it, and certainly want to invite you to go to the wolfcreativelegacy.org. You can see our values there. You can see our board. You can see where we're at in this journey. And if you'll click at the top, the Wolf 80 link, you can look at where we're at and how we're moving toward some of our bigger goals. You know, I would like to hire an archive, you know, probably part-time next year, an archivist for the archive. We want to bring a botanist on site to catalog native plants. We need to do a site survey and survey the buildings so that we can start to create an organized list of priorities for where there may need to be rehabilitation on some of the historic buildings. And we've, you know, contracted with Deval Decker in February of this year to really come into a long-term collaborative partnership. They work in a similar way as I do, trying to intersect with the community around the story that then drives the vision, a collective vision. So if this sounds like something interesting, please be a part physically, or you know, donate to the cause if you can't be there in person, and then follow us on our newsletter, which you can sign up to on the website. And so I am gonna pass it to the audience, and I know Drew's going to be running some microphones here.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause real quick.
And you know, Drew, if I could have the artists from the Wolfe Studio stand up who are in this room. I know we have some, and our interns who have been in the archive before. Izzy's got her phone raised in the air.
If you'll raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone around for questions.
Hi, I wanted to thank you so much for what you spoke about, because one thing that got me was a parent telling their kid, you're not going to make money doing that, so go get a real job. I had that happen to me because I was also an artist that was told, go get a real job, and now I'm back. So how do you succeed as an artist was my question. Did they finally figure out the answer that we need to give to parents? Say, oh, I can make money doing art because the Wolf has shown us the way. So do you have like any, answers to how to succeed as an artist?
Well, I think that my parents' story is inspiring to other artists. I think they actually have inspired a lot of artists in Jackson and in the state. My advice to aspiring artists is you just have to stay at it, and everybody's situation is different, but you can make money as an artist. You just have to figure out how to do it. So, I think it's different for everybody, and it's just like my parents had to figure out how to do it. It's their determination and staying put and doing it that paid off.
Daniel and Bebe, we have a question from the live stream that maybe you guys can answer. And the question is it possible that the Wolfe property was the homestead of the Garland family in the pre-Civil War era? Do either of you know that answer?
The which family?
The Garland family, Garland. Okay.
My father bought the property from Catherine Ellick, and she was the daughter of H.C. Bailey. Bailey High School is named for her. And it was my understanding that H.C. Bailey owned a big swath of property going all the way down Meadowbrook, and with she inherited it. And then she was the one that sold the Primos, where the Primos property is. She sold that to them, and she had a house up at the top of the hill where the studio is. and she sold Carl his piece, and the property I live on was B.A. Brady. He was an architect and built the house for himself. And at the time she sold these properties, they were both bachelors, and she was a bit disappointed that Carl had little bratty children that bothered her. So that's what I know about it.
I will say on that same note, our curiosity extends in that direction, but, you're always kind of circumscribing and saying, well, what can we focus on now? And so as much as we're trying to kind of wrap our arms around and really have some control and understanding of the story of the Wolfe family from 1946 forward on that piece of property, it is in a future step to go further back in time and to really understand that land back into history, all those who have stewarded that land. Because I truly believe to understand where we are today and where we're going, you've got to know where you came from.
Hi. Can you tell us, I'm someone who has not been to the studio. Can you tell me what's at the studio, what's around it? It's almost like, can you sell the studio to me so I have the reason to go? And also, can you tell me anything about the picture behind you?
Well, the painting behind us here was done in 1949, and it's a view from the driveway looking at Old Canton Road. Now, if you're familiar with its location, where Nukes is, where the Rogue, the store that's up at the top of the hill, that's that hill. The hill that you see behind the figures is the hill where all the buildings on the frontage road going over to Highland Village are now. And this is the way it was then, just an open field. And the subdivision, the houses that you see in the distance over on the left side was Broadmoor subdivision. Those houses were just being built in the 40s for the returning veterans. So as you can see, it's really country.
And so I'll take that other part of that question. Here in this painting, you're standing at the bottom of the driveway looking out. Well, if you're coming up the frontage road north of, from Meadowbrook going toward the Whole Foods, just almost immediately on your right, there's a little driveway, and it goes up into the woods, and a little sign says Wolfe Studio. And so once you get past that first little patch of woods, you'll see the original family home on the left, and then a small white cinder block building with 2 parking spots in front of it. And that's the showroom, the gallery, and also where the artists who are glazing the birds are working. And so you would park, you can go inside there, you can see the showroom. There's probably at least 300 figurines on display at any given moment. And then, of course, you can see the artists painting in the kill where they're coming out. And then just beyond that, there's Bebe's studio and some parking in front of it. And then a little pathway that goes to the meditation dojo. And there's a schedule there. I mean, the Jackson Zen group is there Sunday morning. There's a recovery meditation group in the afternoon on Sunday. Monday night, Bebe leads an insight meditation group. Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m. It's just an open to meditate together. There's a Saturday morning Dharma study group. And then further up the hill is Bebe and David's residence. But on any given day, if there's enough artists in the studio, they'll take you on a tour and show you the production buildings out beyond, further from the driveway where, there's, the sculpting or the slip casting with the molds where we're firing things in that original building called Xanadu. That was the first thing built on the property. And then it's just a beautiful piece of land that you're welcome to come and walk around on. Lots and lots of birds, I mean,
I think of it as an oasis of art in the middle of this sort of corporate part of Jackson. You have law firms, you have retail, you have restaurants. The Whole Foods is a step away, but you can step out of that world into a space that has persisted with a really remarkable focus on the making of art and the life of the mind. And to be in that space, even in the midst of one of the busiest parts of Jackson is to experience that serenity that came up earlier in the conversation. It's a special place, and I, for many years, drove by without ever driving, down that driveway, and I'm so glad that I've had a chance to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know we've got some extra questions. We're gonna have time for everybody to hang around. We are gonna wrap up here in just a minute, but I encourage everybody, if you've got questions, Daniel, Bebe, and Michael are gonna be around to answer all those questions. And so they have all of their stuff right over here behind us. And so you guys can come and engage with them. We'd love for you guys to stay for a little bit longer, but we have hit the top of the hour. But let's give Michael, Bebe, and Daniel another round of applause.
Thank you so much.
And again, we don't want you to stop here. Come and engage with us further. We're so thankful to have all of you here with us. Come back and join us again for next week's History is Lunch. We'll have some of our folks from the curatorial staff giving a behind-the-scenes look at how the Mississippi Made exhibit came together. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys next week.
Perfect, Mike.